So I want you to imagine it's 1916.
Okay.
The United States hasn't even, officially entered World War I yet.
Right.
And the government in Washington is just dragging its feet. It's totally bogged down in this massive debate over whether to get involved in a European conflict at all. So a group of 12 college kids, using their own trust funds, secretly buy a fleet of flying boats.
Just buy them.
Yeah, they literally just buy them, and they take them down to Palm Beach, train themselves to fly, and then they march into the office of the Secretary of the Navy and say, "We are your Air Force now."
It's amazing.
It sounds like a ridiculous movie script, like the kind of thing you'd roll your eyes at in a theater.
Yeah.
But it actually happened. And the thing is, those 12 kids from Yale didn't just stop at building a private Air Force. They actually went on to build the modern CIA.
Yeah. They totally bypassed the federal government because they felt it was, too slow. And then the government just absorbed them. It is one of the most stunning examples of how private wealth and, elite collegiate networking literally bootstrapped the American national security state.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because today, in part 2 of our mini-series on the Architects of Empire, our deep dive into the source material is taking us straight into the heart of Yale University's Skull and Bones Society.
Right.
And I want to be incredibly clear right out of the gate here. We are taking all those sensationalized internet conspiracy theories, the Illuminati, the shadow government, the world domination stuff. We are throwing them completely out the window.
Exactly. The reality is actually much more fascinating than the conspiracies. And frankly, it's a lot more instructive.
Yeah.
Because the mission of this deep dive, acting as historical researchers analyzing actual institutional power, is to look at Skull and Bones strictly as a highly efficient institutional incubator.
Right, because we have a mountain of verified historical records for this.
We really do. We're talking about declassified diplomatic cables, corporate charters, internal memorandums, and they show exactly how a specific collegiate society transformed elite social networks into tangible, functional state power between World War I and the Vietnam War.
Right, and that is the absolute core of what we're looking at today, because we have documented proof showing how a few dozen men, just a handful of guys from the exact same secret society, ended up building the modern CIA, centralizing the National Security Council, and laying down the U.S. financial architecture.
It's huge.
So if you've ever looked at the massive, sprawling bureaucracy of the American government and wondered how it actually functions behind closed doors, this is the origin story.
Yeah.
But to understand how these men eventually shaped armies and intelligence agencies, we can't start in Washington.
No, you have to start with the money.
Money has to come first.
Right.
Because if you want to build a global empire, you need the financial substructure to support it.
You absolutely do. Before they were diplomats or intelligence chiefs, these guys were bankers. The commercial bedrock for this entire network was poured in Lower Manhattan. Private investment banking in the interwar period was essentially unregulated.
Wow, okay.
And it really functioned as the vanguard of American foreign policy.
So the sources point to a very specific date that acts as ground zero for this financial consolidation. That's January 1st, 1931.
Right.
This is the date of the merger that creates Brown Brothers Harriman and Company. BBH.
Yeah.
So you have Brown Brothers & Co., which had been around since, 1818, merging with W.A. Harriman and Company and Harriman Brothers, and they form one of the absolute largest private investment banks in the United States. But here's the thing. The jaw-dropping stat isn't the money.
No.
It's the personnel. Out of the 17 founding partners who took control of this new financial behemoth, 12 were Yale grads.
Yep.
And 8 of those 12 were Skull and Bones initiates.
It's wild. Nearly half the founding partners of a massive global financial engine shared the exact same secret society initiation.
That's insane.
That concentration of a specific social network at the heights of transatlantic capital is just staggering. And BBH didn't just operate to generate wealth for these men.
Right.
It functioned as a centralized clearinghouse for foreign policy influence.
So let's look at the mechanics of that.
Yeah.
Starting with W. Averell Harriman. Skull and Bones class of 1913.
Right.
So he was the son of E.H. Harriman, this massive railroad magnate, and he inherits one of the biggest fortunes in early 20th century America. But he doesn't just, sit on a beach somewhere.
But definitely not.
In 1922, he establishes his own firm and aggressively expands into European markets. Like, the documents show him partnering directly with German industrial executives to essentially take control of the Hamburg-America shipping line. He is privately buying up European infrastructure.
Which introduces a crucial concept from the research that we really need to define here.
Yeah.
And that's commercial internationalism. And see, Harriman wasn't just investing. He was developing a worldview. His exposure to global private finance completely shaped his diplomatic philosophy for the rest of his life.
So break down commercial internationalism for me. What does that actually look like in practice?
So think of the world as a massive interconnected spreadsheet.
Okay.
For Harriman and his circle, you couldn't isolate American prosperity from European stability.
Oh, I see.
They believed that American financial stability, international trade access, and strategic state intervention were all inextricably linked.
Right.
If Germany's economy collapsed, American factories would stall. Therefore, private bankers had a duty to manage global infrastructure.
Wow.
So when Harriman later becomes the ambassador to the Soviet Union and special envoy to Great Britain during WWII, he views global diplomacy through that exact same spreadsheet.
That makes a lot of sense.
He doesn't see a difference between private financial stewardship and federal executive authority.
So the boundaries between Wall Street and Washington were virtually non-existent for these guys.
Basically non-existent.
Because the BBH partners were constantly taking leaves of absence, right? One month you are underwriting a European shipping lane, the next month you are directing a federal wartime mobilization board, and then you just go back to the bank.
It was a revolving door that just never locked.
Yeah.
But while Harriman was the outward-facing global diplomat, the man running the actual machinery back in Lower Manhattan was Prescott Bush.
Okay, yes, Skull and Bones class of 1917.
Exactly. He is brought into the Harriman banking empire by his father-in-law, George Herbert Walker. And by 1931, Bush is a managing partner at PBH.
Right.
And he is the guy underwriting the expansion of domestic and international industry. The sources show he was instrumental in securing the private financing for William S. Paley to buy CBS in 1931.
Wait, CBS? Like the television and radio network?
Yes. That is a critical detail.
Yeah.
They are anchoring their capital into the emerging national media apparatus.
Oh, wow.
They aren't just funding steel mills and coal mines anymore. They are funding the literal infrastructure of mass communication.
See, that's wild. But hold on, wait. I need to push back hard on this next part of Prescott Bush's record because this is where things get really intense in the primary sources.
Correct.
As a managing partner at BBH, Bush oversaw the administration of the Union Banking Corporation, or UBC, in Manhattan.
Right.
Now, UBC was established in partnership with a bank in Rotterdam controlled by Fritz Thyssen, who was a major German industrialist. And the historical records verify, this isn't a rumor, it's in the Federal Archive.
It is.
It shows that in October 1942, under the Trading with the Enemy Act, the U.S. government seized the shares of UBC and several affiliated enterprises managed by Bush.
That's right.
We are in the middle of World War II. Wait, so the government seized Bush's bank because it held assets for a German industrialist. Was this ideological collusion?
It's an alarming detail on its face. It really is.
Yeah.
And post-war journalism has often sensationalized it. But if we are sticking strictly to the primary archival documentation, there is absolutely zero evidence of ideological collusion.
But you can't just brush that off as a misunderstanding. The federal government seized his bank.
Right, but it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the mechanical inertia of international capital.
What do you mean?
What that seizure reflected was a systemic tendency of interwar Wall Street investment houses. Throughout the 1920s and 30s, these American firms embedded themselves deeply into European industrial finance.
Right, because that's where the money was.
That was how you generated returns. So when the war broke out, they didn't view these assets as political endorsements. They viewed them purely as commercial obligations on a ledger.
Oh.
They maintained those investments right up until they were legally and forcefully stopped by federal wartime authority.
So it was just pure, cold financial mechanics.
Yes.
They were bankers managing assets, and it literally took the blunt force of the Trading with the Enemy Act to sever the financial ties they had spent a decade building. The spreadsheet didn't care about the war until the government forced it to.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And to answer your earlier question, it didn't end his career because the federal government recognized it as an administrative enforcement action against an institutional ledger. It wasn't a treasonous act by an individual.
That is just so foreign to how we think about things today.
It is. I mean, Prescott Bush later became a U.S. Senator from Connecticut,
Yeah.
heavily advocating for Cold War military expenditures.
Which is wild to think about.
Yeah.
You have this incredibly tight circle at BBH. They have massive investments in heavy industry. They underwrite the national broadcast media with CBS. They are managing transatlantic capital.
Mm-hmm.
You can see how having your hands on media, energy, and banking provides the ultimate scaffolding for influence.
Absolutely.
But here's the narrative pivot. Because having a global financial empire is useless if you can't protect it. Money requires security. If your assets are global, your military needs to be global.
But the U.S. military in the early 20th century was not a global expeditionary force.
Right.
It was relatively small, localized, and bureaucratically slow.
Which brings us back to that wild story from the intro. 1916, the first Yale unit.
Yes.
These guys didn't wait for the government to build a modern military. They just went out and bought one.
They really did.
Yeah.
F. Truby Davison, who would later be tapped for Skull and Bones in 1918, he saw that naval aviation was going to be the future of warfare.
Right.
And the U.S. Navy just wasn't moving fast enough for him. So he organized 11 other Yale undergrads, and they privately funded their own aviation unit.
Privately funded by their elite families. I mean, Davison's dad was a senior partner at J.P. Morgan.
Exactly.
So they bought flying boats, went down to Palm Beach, and trained themselves. Then they basically lobbied Secretary of the Navy Josephus Daniels to incorporate them into the official Naval Reserve Flying Corps.
Yep.
And they actually saw real action. Robert A. Lovett, another bonesman in the unit, ended up flying active combat patrols with the Royal Naval Air Service over Northern Europe. So a group of college kids essentially bought their own flying boats, trained in Palm Beach, and went to the Secretary of the Navy to say, "We're your Air Force now."
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the first Yale unit set a massive structural precedent for how this network would operate for the next 50 years.
Oh, so.
You have an elite collegiate cohort that self-organizes. They use their own private wealth to develop military technologies and tactical doctrines. And then, once it's functional, the federal defense infrastructure just directly absorbs them.
It has like a private beta test for the U.S. military.
That's exactly it.
They build the prototype in their backyard, prove it works, and hand it over to the Pentagon.
Because they learned early on that traditional government bureaucracy is full of friction.
Yeah.
If you want something done efficiently, you build the capacity yourself within your high-trust network, and then you institutionalize it.
And the intellectual godfather of all this, I mean, the moral authority hovering over this whole generation of Yale men was Henry L. Stimson, Skull and Bones class of 1888.
Oh, yes, Stimson.
This guy's resume is absurd. Like, U.S. Attorney under Teddy Roosevelt, Secretary of War under Taft, Governor General of the Philippines, Secretary of State under Hoover, and then Secretary of War again under FDR and Truman during WWII,
Right.
overseeing the entire global military mobilization and the Manhattan Project.
Stimson is the ultimate patriarch of the foreign policy establishment. He completely rejected partisan isolationism.
Right.
He operated on a philosophy of what we call patrician duty.
Petition duty.
They genuinely believed that the general public and the slow-moving democratic bureaucracy were not equipped to handle the existential threats of the 20th century.
Right.
During World War II, Stimson didn't rely on the standard military bureaucracy. To get around the red tape, he surrounded himself with an informal, highly efficient executive cadre of men he already implicitly trusted. Men from his exact social lineage.
He brings in Robert A. Lovett, the guy from the 1st Yale unit and BBH.
Yep.
Makes him Assistant Secretary of War for Air. He brings in Harvey H. Bundy, Skull and Bones, 1908, as his special assistant. They are literally running the War Department like an alumni association.
Because it removed friction.
Wow.
They could make decisions about global troop movements and bomber production in a fraction of the time it would take a traditional congressional committee.
Which seamlessly explains their next leap. Because military hardware, bombers, tanks, logistics, that is one thing. You can build that in a factory.
Right.
But intelligence requires a completely different mechanism. Intelligence requires ultimate secrecy and implicit trust. You can't just hire a spy off the street and hope they don't sell you out.
Trust is the most expensive commodity in espionage.
Totally.
Where do you find operatives you can trust with the most sensitive secrets of a global war?
Well, you recruit from the one place where secrecy, psychological vetting, and trust are literally baked into the daily ritual.
Exactly.
You recruit from your own secret society.
Which brings us to Robin Wink's brilliant historical study, cloak and gown.
Yes, I love this part of the sources.
It's fascinating. This is one of our primary sources, and it details exactly how academic networks at Yale transformed directly into operational intelligence directorates for the OSS.
Right. The Office of Strategic Services.
Right, which was the precursor to the CIA.
So we have to dive into the story of Norman Holmes Pearson. He's a Yale English professor, a world-renowned authority on modern poetry, and a Skull and Bones member. And in December 1942, he gets recruited into the OSS, and they send this poetry professor to London to head the X2 branch.
And the X2 branch was the counterintelligence division.
Okay.
Pearson was suddenly managing double agents, coordinating with British intelligence, and processing ultra-signals intelligence. That is the decrypted German Enigma codes from Bletchley Park.
Stop right there, because this is where the how is so important. Why on earth are they sending a modern poetry professor to run counterintelligence?
That sounds absurd.
It sounds like a terrible misallocation of skills.
It does, until you look at the mechanics of what he actually did for a living.
Okay.
Analyzing modern poetry requires identifying hidden meanings, reading between the lines, recognizing patterns in syntax, and understanding deeply complex human psychology.
Oh, wow.
So when a double agent sends a report or a decrypted German cable comes across your desk, you aren't just reading the words. You are analyzing the subtext, the omissions, the structural anomalies.
That is wild.
Right. The skill set required to deconstruct a T.S. Eliot poem is remarkably similar to the skill set required to evaluate a compromised spy.
That is fascinating. The analytical machinery is exactly the same, just applied to a different text.
Exactly.
And Pearson's main job in London becomes recruiting. He uses his academic position at Yale and his secret society connections to evaluate potential operatives.
And look at the specific traits he was recruiting for.
Okay.
He wanted linguistic ability and intellectual dexterity, certainly. But above all, he was looking for emotional self-control and an uncritical devotion to national security interests.
Right.
He was looking for men who could keep a secret, who wouldn't break under psychological pressure, and who valued institutional loyalty above all else.
Sounds familiar.
He was looking for the exact psychological profile cultivated inside the Skull and Bones tomb.
And one of his most famous recruits is James Jesus Angleton, Yale class of 41. Angleton trains under Pearson in London, takes over OSS counterintelligence in Italy, and eventually becomes the legendary chief of counterintelligence for the CIA for 2 decades.
It's a direct pipeline. And that Yale to CIA pipeline only became more formalized after the war.
Right.
When the CIA was officially established in 1947, they needed to institutionalize their talent acquisition. And who did they bring in as the very first director of personnel in 1951? F. Truby Davison.
Wait, the same F. Truby Davison who started the privately funded first Yale Unit Aviation Group in 1916.
The exact same man.
Oh my gosh.
He goes from building a private air force to building the personnel architecture of the CIA.
Wow.
And Davison ensured that the CIA's early recruitment heavily prioritized elite university graduates. These were men whose backgrounds, social connections, and institutional loyalties were considered thoroughly vetted by their social class long before a formal government security check was even run.
Okay, let's break down the mechanics of why this was so effective. Because the sources mention an academic concept here that completely reframes how I look at government.
You're referring to transaction cost reduction.
Yes, explain that.
So think of standard government bureaucracy like a massive, inefficient toll road.
Okay.
Every time an agency needs to talk to another agency, you just stop your car, roll down the window, show your ID, pay a fee, and wait for the gate to open.
Right.
It incurs massive friction due to interagency rivalries, partisan conflicts, and security compartmentalization.
So what Skull and Bones provided was essentially a geopolitical easy pass.
That is the perfect analogy. Because they shared the same secret society background, they bypassed the toll booths entirely.
Oh, I see.
Imagine a scenario where a CIA intelligence chief needs to coordinate a covert operation with a Wall Street investment banker and a general at the Pentagon.
Normally, that would be a nightmare.
Normally, that takes weeks of vetting, feeling each other out, and navigating bureaucratic red tape. But if all 3 men are bonesmen, they already possess a shared lexicon.
Right.
They have lifelong trust forged in the initiation rituals of the tomb. They have identical normative assumptions about how the world works. They can get on a single phone call, bypass the bureaucracy entirely, and execute a complex strategy in an afternoon.
I hear that. And the logic makes perfect sense, but I have to throw a wrench into this theory based on one of the biggest names in the intelligence files.
Okay, go ahead.
Richard M. Bissell Jr. This is the guy who ran the U-2 spy plane program. He oversaw the Bay of Pigs invasion for the CIA. He is a massive foundational figure in the intelligence world.
He absolutely is.
But the sources explicitly note that when he was a student at Yale, he actually declined his tap for Skull and Bones.
Yes, he did.
He turned them down. Doesn't that poke a hole in the idea that you had to be in the society to hold power?
It's a vital nuance. It doesn't break the theory, though. It actually clarifies the exact nature of this network. Skull and Bones wasn't the only path to power. It was simply the most concentrated locus of power within a much broader elite culture.
So it wasn't a rigid requirement, it was just the most efficient networking node.
Exactly. Bissell declined his tap, but look at his structural background. He was in the Elizabethan Club at Yale. He went to Groton, the elite preparatory school.
Oh, okay.
His brother William was in Skull and Bones. Bissell was born into and operated within the exact same social class, the exact same metropolitan clubs, and the exact same Ivy League environments.
So he was still part of the club, essentially.
Skull and Bones was just the ultimate distillation of that broader patrician culture. You didn't have to be in the tomb to run the CIA, but you absolutely had to be part of the social fabric that the tomb represented.
That makes total sense. It's not a binary you're in or you're out of the conspiracy. It's about being part of an insulated ecosystem.
Yep.
So this high-trust network builds the transatlantic financial structure in the 20s and 30s. They pilot the military mobilization in World War II. They staff the intelligence agencies in the 40s and 50s. And then we get into the height of the Cold War. And this specific group of men, historically known as the Wise Men, are fully in charge of the American empire.
They are single-handedly directing the foreign policy of the free world.
You've got Robert A. Lovett from the Yale Flying Unit and BBH. As Undersecretary of State, he designs the Marshall Plan, rebuilding Europe.
Right.
He drafts the North Atlantic Treaty, which creates NATO. As Secretary of Defense, he oversees NSC 68. That is the document that literally codifies the global containment of the Soviet Union.
Yeah, the entire architecture of the Cold War is drafted by his pen.
And then you have the Bundy brothers. William P. Bundy, Skull and Bones 39, serves in the CIA, the State Department, and later edits Foreign Affairs magazine, shaping the intellectual consensus.
And his brother, George Bundy, Skull and Bones 1940. He becomes a national security advisor for both John F. Kennedy and Lyndon B. Johnson. And McGeorge Bundy takes the National Security Council and fundamentally transforms it from a passive advisory board into a centralized, highly powerful executive nerve center right inside the White House.
So they have achieved ultimate power and ultimate cohesion. The machine is fully operational.
Yes.
But here's where it gets really interesting, because the sources make a devastatingly compelling argument that the exact same social cohesion that made them so brilliantly efficient during World War II, that EZ Pass they used to bypass the toll roads, is the exact thing that caused their greatest catastrophe in the 1960s.
Yes. The structural vulnerability of this high-trust network is a phenomenon known as epistemic closure.
We need to break that down.
Yeah.
Because it feels like the tragic flaw in a Greek drama.
It really does.
How does extreme competence turn into epistemic closure?
So think of it like they built a massive, multi-billion-dollar supercomputer to run a global war.
Okay.
But they only programmed that supercomputer to understand Wall Street accounting data and prep school debate logic. Epistemic closure happens when a group is so homogeneous, so deeply insulated in their shared background, that they become structurally incapable of processing information outside their specific worldview.
I see.
Because all these men shared the exact same educational, cultural, and socioeconomic background, they viewed their specific class preferences, things like legalism, technocracy, private capital rights, and quantitative management. They viewed those not as cultural preferences, but as universal human truths.
They thought the way a Yale banker thought was the way the universe fundamentally operated.
That was their fatal flaw. When the reality on the ground didn't match their worldview, the supercomputer just kept spitting out error codes.
Wow.
They thought the data was wrong, but the reality was their programming was blind. Because of that epistemic closure, they were structurally unable to comprehend organic foreign nationalist movements.
Right.
They couldn't understand ideological anti-colonialism. They couldn't compute domestic populist dissent.
And this all violently collides in Vietnam.
Tragically, yes. George Bundy and his contemporary advisors approached the escalating conflict in Southeast Asia not as a messy, organic, ideological human rebellion, but as a quantitative management problem.
They were literally applying Wall Street operational metrics to a jungle guerrilla war.
They thought they could solve a nationalist uprising using game theory and gradual military escalation models.
That is just...
If we drop X amount of bombs, the enemy will calculate that the cost is too high and surrender, because that is what a rational Wall Street banker would do.
Oh my gosh.
They tracked body counts the same way they tracked quarterly earnings reports at BBH.
But the Viet Congs weren't playing by Wall Street rules. They were fighting for their homeland.
And because the decision-making environment in the White House was so insular, they systematically excluded dissenting perspectives.
Right.
If a field reporter or a mid-level analyst said, hey, this game theory isn't working on the ground, they were dismissed as not understanding the big picture. The wise men mistook their own intense social cohesion for objective strategic wisdom. The failure of the U.S. intervention in Vietnam perfectly highlights the inherent limitation of governance by a self-perpetuating patrician elite.
Yeah.
When everyone in the room has the exact same background, the exact same education, and the exact same blind spots, nobody is there to tell you when you are completely disconnected from reality.
Wow. They built this incredible machine to project power, but the machine had no external sensors. It could only read its own internal diagnostics.
Exactly.
So to synthesize everything we've looked at in these sources today, we started out looking for the blueprints of American power. We looked past the internet conspiracies. And what we found wasn't a shadow syndicate, but it also wasn't just an innocent alumni networking club.
No, it was a highly functional, highly insular ruling network. They successfully translated their private, collegiate social cohesion into public policy, national strategy, and global power projection.
They built the CIA from the ground up. They centralized the National Security Council into the nerve center it is today, and they forged the military-industrial synthesis that still defines our economy.
Yeah.
Understanding this specific era and this specific group of skull and bones men is basically a shortcut to understanding why the U.S. government is structured the way it is today. It was literally designed by these men to bypass the friction of normal democratic bureaucracy.
This raises an important question, though.
What's that?
Because, as the historical sources note, the direct dominance of this specific patrician class did begin to erode late in the 20th century.
Right.
You had the democratization of higher education, the GI Bill brought in new demographics,
Right.
and there was the rise of a more diverse bureaucratic technocracy.
Yeah.
The absolute monopoly of the Yale man broke.
Okay.
But the structural framework they built, the massive, unaccountable intelligence network, the highly centralized executive power, that remains the defining foundation of modern American governance.
Which leaves us with something really crucial to think about. If you're listening to this and you look at the landscape of power today, we know that Ivy League secret society has lost its absolute monopoly on state power. But what exactly has replaced it? Have we actually dismantled the system of insulated elites running the world? Or have we just traded the epistemic closure of the tomb for new, equally blind monocultures?
Right.
Are we now being governed by the tech utopianism of Silicon Valley billionaires who think every human problem can be solved with an algorithm? Or the insular bubbles of DC think tanks who only talk to each other on cable news? What modern invisible networks are currently sitting in windowless rooms making game theory decisions about our future, completely isolated from everyday organic dissent? We went looking for the architecture of power, but maybe the scariest thought is that the building they build is still standing. We just don't know who is holding the blueprints anymore.